Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to school for the next week. Lots of things have changed, but also kind of have remained the same. Google Classroom doesn't work yet because there's only a few names on the list. I don't know why it's taking so long. This should have been done last Tuesday. Don't know when it's going to be finally done. The complication that gives us is it means that I can't take in your videos yet because we've got no way for you to submit them to me. So we're going to leave that until it's finished. It should be any day now. I mean, how long can it take? It should be done. So we're going to hold off on that. I'll let you know when we're finally ready to submit those. So any of you that haven't finished them, you've got a little bit of extra time. You shouldn't need it. I only wanted 5 minutes of audio. So we're going to move on through the book. Now, as I said before, I know most of you don't have the books. Yeah, we were told on Monday morning that this wasn't going to happen, so I don't expect any of you to have taken the books home. So where necessary, I'll take photos of the books and I'll do something with it. We are going to go through an explanation now. I will go through some of the questions with you, but we'll do it in the only way I can see to do it. We'll do it in a discussion format, and you can send the answers through Google Meet. It's not perfect, but we'll try and make it work. I'll write the questions on the board or something. I'll try and figure this out until we get Google Classroom running. So we're going to move on to the next section in the book. So those of you that got it, it's page 173, Unit 6, Explanations. So by the end of this unit, you should be able to listen for reason. The ability to listen for reason should be a skill you've already mastered, I would hope. Read and understand various kinds of explanations, use grammatical features associated with explanations, use technical terms and neutral language. Neutral language is fairly important, the ability to give forward your message without adding any emotion to it is quite an important skill because it makes you seem a lot more trustworthy, more honest. Give an explanation. There wouldn't be much point in studying explanations if you weren't able to actually use those skills. Identify patterns and relationships and write a description. How much of this we'll actually get through, I don't know. I think somebody's driving past in what I can only assume is a boat being towed behind a tractor. We really don't know what the situation is at the moment. It's crazy out there. There's blind panic and nothing's making real sense, so you can't apply logic to it and try and work out what's going to happen. We hope it's only going to be a couple more weeks. Let's just fingers crossed on that. We'll just hope for the best. So we're going to look at explanations and what they are. So skip forward to 174. We'll have a look at the overview. Explanations show why something is the way it is or how it works. So explanations answer questions, basically. They give you an explanation. They give you the information about how or why something is the way it is or the way it needs to be used. Explanations usually begin with a general statement about the subject. So just like anything else, they're going to begin with an introduction. So a general sweeping statement that serves to introduce the subject that we're going to be talking about. That's how we begin. Then it gives a series of statements about how or why the subject came into existence or how it works. So again, just like everything else we've been doing, information reports, everything, it's a list of details in logical order that increasingly tell us how things work in some kind of logical order. The series of statements is called the explanation sequence. The statements are often in chronological order. How you work out what the chronological order is up to you. Order of importance, the order of steps you need to take. Any of those things is fine so long as there's logic to it and the logic is obvious to your audience, because that's the important part. Explanations can end by summing up the main points. So just like an information report, we have our opening statement, we have a series of points, and then we close with no new information by summarizing the key points. So essentially, we're looking at the same thing, but delivering very slightly different information. We can use diagrams, flowcharts, and illustrations to help the reader understand the explanation. So just like anything else, sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words, especially if we're looking at instructions, instruction manuals or something else. I've got motorcycle manuals and it says all sorts of information about how to do things, and really there's no substitute for a simple diagram or a photograph to show you just what the hell they're talking about. Sometimes, I mean, I'm a writer and I really do believe in the written word, but sometimes a picture is just easier. Explanations should not be confused with instructions. Instructions tell you what to do, explanations tell you how to do it. There is a very, very big difference. I can tell you what to do, but every time you see a hand come up, those hands aren't asking for more instructions, they're asking for an explanation. So instructions at the beginning, if the instructions aren't clear, we need an explanation. So explanations are extra information to tell us how to or why something happens. Instructions have a specific task of giving directions on how to make or do something. Sometimes instructions are included as part of explanations. Yeah, there is a lot of crossover here, but instructions tell you what to do, explanations tell you how to do it. That's the key difference. Explanations often form part of other texts. The following are some examples of where explanations can be found. They can be found pretty much everywhere, but here are some examples. Articles on scientific inventions. Of course, if we're talking about how something is, then you need to know how it works. So an explanation of what it is, how it functions, what it does for you is key. Books showing how machines work. Obviously, books showing how things work are going to be one big explanation. Reports about natural phenomenon. Advice on consequences of action. So if you fail to do something, here's what will happen and why it will happen. Letters giving reasons for actions. Textbooks, some brochures, pamphlets and leaflets. Television documentaries. So if you actually, if you look, it's all very logical. You're going to find explanations of why things work in articles, books, reports, advice brochures. All the things that we haven't been given about the current situation. There's been no explanation for any of it. That's why we know there's something not quite right here. There's no logic to this. So there needs to be logic. Explanations aren't just there to help you understand. They're there to help you see why we're doing something. I can tell you, come into class, be on time, and shut up. That's not very helpful. But if I explain to you, being on time saves everybody in the class from wasting their time. It means we can all start on time and I can get all the material out there. I need you to sometimes be quiet so that I can explain things properly. That's much more useful than me just saying, come here on time or I'll punish you, and shut up or I'll give you some extra work to do. It's much more useful if I can explain why something needs to happen. Then, if you agree with me, you're much more likely to cooperate. That's what's been missing in the entire current situation. They're saying, do this, do that, and no one knows why. And no one knows why what they're doing. Yesterday, I had a couple of tuk-tuk rides. And because the ministry has said everyone needs to wash their hands, you get in a tuk-tuk and the tuk-tuk driver now sprays and washes their own hands. And that makes no sense because they're not touching anything I've touched. They're not going to touch me in any way. There's a barrier separating the pair of us. And they're washing their hands with alcohol because someone told them to do it, and they're blindly following instructions without having any idea why they're doing what they're doing. This is where it all goes wrong. We're in a situation now where it's all instructions and no explanation, and it's all breaking down. The logic doesn't exist. That's why things are getting bad. The explanation helps to get people on side. And instead of telling everybody, wear a mask. Why? Because we tell you to wear a mask. If we actually explained how masks work, why they work, and what the situation is behind them, more people would cooperate. Now, in America, where people are a little bit more free-thinking, there's a big movement about refusing to wear masks because they don't work. There is no explanation. The American government never gave an explanation. They just said, wear masks. We want you to wear masks. And people were saying, well, why? Because the fibers in the mask are way too big to stop any kind of virus from being spread out. If you sneeze in a mask, it's not going to stop the virus from spreading. Somebody else wearing a mask isn't going to stop the virus getting into you. Viruses aren't spread that way. So people refuse to do it, especially when people started getting sick from wearing masks. People are getting secondary infections from breathing in through dirty or wet masks. So people started to refuse to do it because there's no logical good sense. That's where an explanation would have come in. If we could explain to people why, they're more likely to cooperate. If we can make a good, sensible argument for why something needs to happen, people are going to be more sympathetic towards it. I can tell you the rules. Most people will follow them. But if I can tell you the rules, why they're the rules, and how everything's supposed to work, and why it needs to work, we'll get everybody on side. That's what we need. That's why explanations are important. They take us from just being told what to do to understanding why things have to happen the way they do. That takes us from a dictatorship into a democracy. And that whole system seems to have broken down. But there we go, that's how it is. So, we're going to be looking at explanations. Now, one of the key things I want you to carry on board is that the ones in the books, as we're going to study now, are not very good. Now, you know what these books are like. We've got The Frozen Mammoths, we've got Going Forwards, Kampung Pastimes. Nobody wants to read that. Really nobody wants to read that. We've got Shaking Hands. I'm not joking. Page 190, Shaking Hands. How to shake hands. It's actually a lot more interesting than you think, because we can go into the body language of shaking hands, and I can explain how things work. It is more difficult when no one's here to shake my hand. Last time we did this, we got people up, and I shook hands in different ways and showed you what they all mean, and why shaking hands works, and how it doesn't work. But at least you can tell something about somebody from doing it. Then we've got some tenses we will look at, because you guys are weak at tenses, because, you know, as we've covered before, your language doesn't use them, English does, so it's always something we have a problem with, so we will take every opportunity to look at tenses. Then we've got forensic science proves dead men can tell tales, not very long but probably interesting, and that covers the entire unit. Hard to believe, there's like 3 or 4 units in there. So if you want to recommend, or if you want anything else explained, we can go over that. So I want you to email me through on Facebook about explanations you'd like to see, anything you want to cover that I can do a bit of research on and actually present to the class in a more interesting way than the stuff in the book. So if there is anything that you want to go over, you can be as eclectic and as weird, off the wall as you like, and I'll consider everything. So if there's anything you want to cover, I will consider it. So shoot me a message on email through Facebook. I will keep it anonymous. You know, I don't have to say who recommended it, and we might look at it. Okay. So that was the introduction for today. We're going to move on now. Unfortunately, we're going to move on and we're going to look at woolly mammoths. So now, because we don't have Google Classroom, I can't post the writing. So what I've done is I've made you a YouTube video where the pictures are going to be up on the screen, and I'll be talking in a chat box. I know it's not perfect, but at least you can follow along with it. So I'm going to stop this now, and we're going to move on to the next video. Woolly mammoths. So, frozen mammoths. Probably not as boring as it sounds. Have you ever read or watched documentaries on dinosaurs or other prehistoric animals? Why do you think people would be interested in prehistoric ancestors of the animals we know today? Again, this is a slightly... My tripod is actually sliding very slowly down. I'm not touching it, honestly. This is a bit misleading. Dinosaurs died out, we believe, millions of years ago, literally millions of years ago. Woolly mammoths didn't. Woolly mammoths were a fairly recent animal that we lost. They died out in the last ice age, only about 150,000 odd years ago. We're not entirely sure why. There is a theory that Pluto entered our solar system, an ice planet. It came in, hit Mars, moved Mars out of its orbit, which destroyed all life on Mars, and some of the ice particles entered Earth's atmosphere, knocking us out of orbit and cooling us down at the same time. So we picked up a lot of ice, Earth cooled, it caused another ice age. That's one theory. There's lots of others, but something happened. Some cataclysmic event happened recently, and it threw Earth into an ice age. Another theory that I read about was that As Earth goes on its orbit, every 150,000 years or so, it goes out to the furthest extremes and it wobbles. And sometimes we switch polar axis, so north becomes south. When it wobbled, the ice stored at the ice caps moved, and it broke free, and it caused an ice age that way, killing most of the life on Earth. Only a few species, including us, survived. Because we're adaptable, some of us survived. And this might be true, and this might be where we get the Bible stories of Noah's Ark and things like that from, because all the religions have a story like that about all life being saved by some sort of rescue vehicle, a boat of some sort, and then finding some land and slowly recovering from the floods. We don't know. Simple story, we don't know. But these animals did die out. Things like a mammoth is going to die out because it's a very large animal and it needs a lot of food. So they're the first things that go when there's a shortage of food. That's what happened to the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were very large creatures. When something killed them off, when we believe some sort of space object, a meteorite, an asteroid, hit Earth, sent a lot of dust up, cut off the sunlight. When that happened, the plants died out, and the very large dinosaurs that were eating the plants didn't have a food supply anymore, so the bigger the animal, the quicker it died out. And of course, when there's no plant-eating animals left, there's no food for the predators, so the whole chain just fell apart. That's what we believe killed the dinosaurs. And the similar thing happened with the large mammals. There just wasn't food for them, so they perished. Now we have discovered the remains of mammoths, very well preserved. I think one of them was found a few years ago that was edible. It was literally the meat on it would have been edible. We could have eaten it and survived. It was that well preserved, frozen in ice. So these things, we know a lot about mammoths. They definitely existed quite recently, and we definitely interacted with them as human beings. So I'm going to read through, those of you that have the page number, we're going to look at page 178. So I'm going to read through the frozen mammoths. I'm going to put the words up on the screen for you, and then we'll do the questions. So, a mammoth discovered half kneeling, half standing in a bank of the Bereskova River in Siberia puzzled scientists for many years. For the strangest thing of all about the frozen, well-preserved monster was that it had buttercups in its mouth. This odd fact, at first overlooked, was to provide a clue to a terrible moment in Earth's history. Mammoths were long-tusked, hairy members of the elephant family which lived for 500,000 years and became extinct about 20,000 years ago. In the permanently frozen areas of northern Siberia, Alaska and Canada, many of these ancient beasts can still be found, forever preserved like sides of beef in a refrigerator. In spite of the thousands of years which have passed, the meat is still good enough to eat, according to those who have tried. Other long-extinct animals have also been found in the same deep-frozen condition, their bodies often tumbled together in heaps of bones and flesh. Scientists had no difficulty in explaining the ancient tragedy. Huge herds of mammoth used to roam the great Arctic plains, feeding off the grass, reeds and other plants that still cover the land in summer. Every now and then, one of them would get trapped in ice or would fall to its death down a deep crack in a glacier. There, the carcass would freeze and be preserved almost unchanged through the ages. The explanation was obvious. Unfortunately, it was totally wrong. To begin with, the carcasses were found in the wrong places. Vast areas of the Arctic are covered with ice, but most of the tundra is composed of soil, sand, river silt and loam, bound together by frozen water. And the frozen mammoths were discovered not in the ice, but in the silt layers. Moreover, during that period, there were no glaciers in Siberia, except in the upper reaches of the mountains where the mammoths did not graze. A new theory was put forward. The mammoths had fallen into rivers and had been carried downstream to the mouths of the rivers. You should never repeat a word in the same sentence twice, where they were buried in silt. But this did not fit either. The monsters were being found in the tundra where there were no rivers, and they could not all have drowned because many of the animals were still standing up. Experts in the deep freeze butchery trade were consulted. Can you imagine that? Experts in the butchery trade. So the scientists don't know what they're doing, so they went and asked butchers. Terrifying. But instead of clearing up the mystery, they made it far more puzzling. It was not possible, they said, to deep freeze a creature as large as a mammoth at the relatively moderate temperatures of Arctic ice. If meat is frozen slowly at ice temperatures, crystals form in the cells of the flesh, bursting the cells and drying the meat. This makes the meat unfit for consumption, and no such process, the butchers added, could have produced the deep frozen mammoth meat. So what we're talking about here is where the water in your cells freezes slowly, and water, when it freezes, expands, which doesn't make any sense, by the way. Water expands when it freezes, and it bursts the cells. And you know this when we freeze things like some fruits, they become all squishy and horrible when they defrost. That's because the water in the cells has expanded, burst the cells, and effectively destroyed the fruit. I mean, we can still eat it, but it's not the same. This is why we can't really freeze human beings to be defrosted later, because we're full of water, our cells burst, and we just can't be recovered. As many gardeners know, buttercups enjoy temperate conditions with alternating sun and rain. Yet apparently at one moment the mammoth was munching away peacefully at the grass and buttercups, growing lush in the sunshine of her temperate plain. The next, so the deep freeze men insisted, it was subject to cold so bitter that it was deep frozen where it stood. The scientists had to explain how it could have happened. No known variation in climate can explain the sudden deep freezing of so many great beasts so many thousands of miles apart. Only a catastrophe could have been responsible. The evidence suggests an earthquake and volcanic eruption more violent than any other ever recorded in history. It is thought that the eruption, which caused the death of the mammoths, was the result of two plates grinding together and bursting open a vast seam deep within the Earth's crust. A deep seam of ice. In so violent an eruption, not only could fiery lava be thrown out from the interior of the Earth, but there would be a great discharge of volcanic gases. If these gases were shot high enough into the upper atmosphere, they would be chilled to very low temperatures. Then, in the upheaval, they would spiral down towards the poles. Descending on the warm blanket of air beneath. The areas where the gases struck would be unimaginably cold, sufficient to deep freeze the mammoths. In Siberia, the mammoths would have been grazing on the tundra when a fierce cold descended to it. The drastic drop in temperature immediately froze its lungs and literally turned its blood to ice. In a few seconds, it would have died. In a few hours, it would have been a solid statue, ready to sink into the earth over the years and be buried in the dusts of time. Scary. Can you imagine 1 minute eating lunch, the next minute being frozen where you sit? Could happen, has happened. Scary stuff. So we've got questions 1 through 13. Now, because we don't have Google Classroom, I can't post those questions. I can't send you pictures of those questions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put the questions up on a video, and then I'll give you a couple of minutes and we'll discuss them. Okay. I'll be back. question 1. What was it about the mammoths that puzzled the scientists most? Well, obviously they froze in a way that wasn't really possible. They froze where they stood, which isn't something we expect. You can't freeze that fast. So something must have happened that we don't understand, because weather doesn't behave this way. So they must have frozen in a way that we didn't understand. So we had to go out and the scientists had to make up an explanation. That's what science does. Number 2, under what conditions would buttercups grow? You've probably never seen buttercups. They need a bit of moisture and they need temperate climates. They need not too cold, not too hot. They grow a lot in England. They're like yellow flowers. There's a really stupid legend in England that if you put a buttercup under your chin and you see a yellow glow, you like butter. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it is true. What was the Arctic tundra made of? Well, it wasn't made of ice. It was made of soil, sand, river silt, and loam, whatever loam is. Too lazy to look it up, sorry. Number 4, explain briefly, in your own words, the scientist's theory of how the mammoth came to be frozen. A vast volcanic eruption blowing gases into the air, which froze, and then the frozen air fell at extreme speed, dropping the temperature to such a degree that it would freeze things where they stood. It's an explanation, but there is no evidence for it, so I would take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, it's not observable, so at the moment it's an explanation, and you have to remember that a lot of these things are just theories. Why was the scientist's theory wrong? Well, we're obviously referring to a different section from the story here. Why was the scientist's theory wrong? The original theory was that they had frozen by dropping it in and just freezing in the water. So I'm wrong with the last question. It's not possible for them to have frozen like that. It would have burst their cells and it would have damaged them. Give a reason why the new theory was found to be wrong. A reason why the new theory was... Well, the new theory is the one about the... no known variation in climate can explain the sudden deep freezing of so many great beasts, so many thousands of miles apart. I'm not sure what they're talking about here, because there's only 2 theories mentioned about, and it doesn't mention that the second one is wrong. What must the scientist's theory explain for it to be accepted? It must be able to explain how the mammoths were frozen solid almost instantly. And I don't think they've actually managed to do that quite yet. What phrase from the passage had a similar meaning to permanently frozen? Line 9. Let's have a look at line 9. Permanently frozen. What? What phrase from the passage had a similar meaning to permanently frozen? Okay. I'm going to skip that because any alternate version of permanently frozen would be acceptable. Explain the phrase tumbled together in heaps of bones and flesh. It means that the pressure of this situation, whatever it was, the pressure would have crushed the animals, ripping their flesh from their bones, so it would have tumbled them together in a heap of broken bodies, much like if you scooped up human remains with a tractor. For each of the following words, give one word or short phrase of not more than 7 words which has the same meaning the word has in the passage. Overlooked, ignored, extinct, died out, roam, wander, vast, huge, relatively, fairly closely, consumption, eating, lush, bountiful, catastrophe, disaster. What would be the figurative meaning of the phrase turned its blood to ice? What would be the figurative... I think figuratively, turned its blood to ice is pretty figurative, because it's... again, that doesn't make sense, because it figuratively couldn't have turned its blood to ice. You can't turn blood to ice. You can freeze ice, but ice, by definition, is frozen water, and blood contains water, but it also contains blood. So it's not possible for it to have actually turned to ice. So I think it's already figurative. The opposite of figurative being literal. You can't turn blood to ice, you can freeze blood. So I think figuratively, turning blood to ice is already a figurative sentence. What kind of evidence do you think scientists would look for to support their theories? Science. Science has become dogmatic. Science has become almost a god. It seeks answers without evidence these days. You all know what I'm talking about. Look at physics. I was always taught in physics that you can't destroy energy. You can only take energy and turn it from one thing into another. You can only change its form. But then we have potential energy, where we can literally expend energy by raising up a heavy object. Now it contains potential energy if I drop it. Well, that doesn't make any sense because the energy of gravity is going to pull it down, and that energy is already being used and it's being generated. Gravity is an energy wave by definition. Now what about if we take that object and we throw it in space where the gravity no longer acts on it? Then we've converted chemical energy into nothing. There is no potential energy in that object because it's not being drawn to gravity. So physics has kind of fallen apart as our levels of science have expanded, and it's not been adapted. It's not grown up, it's not changed. I'm sure your physics teacher would agree with me that a lot of what we teach as absolute fact is years out of date. Same thing with the theory of evolution. It was never more than a theory, and now that we've mapped the human genome, we know that DNA contains markers that doesn't allow for extensive adaptation. So we know that the theory wasn't absolutely correct, and we know that. Darwin himself refuted it. So we still teach sometimes as facts things that were only ever a theory. So what kind of evidence do you think scientists look for to support their theories? I would say generally insufficient. This is again why science fails. What kind of evidence do you think scientists look for to support their theories? That isn't how science works. Science should look for explanations for why things are. It shouldn't be about coming up with ideas and then finding evidence to support those ideas. It should be getting all the evidence together in the first place and then finding the only explanation that still works and makes sense. Not in getting a theory and then trying to find a way to support it. That's why science frequently fails. And when I talk about science failing, I'm talking about, look at medicine. Look at medicine. In America now, we're giving children antidepressant drugs, which are causing massive, massive problems. And it's only about 30 or 40 years ago that we were doing surgery, brain surgery on people with mental health issues. We've moved on past that. Then we went to electroconvulsive shock therapy. Now we're chemically coshing them with drugs that are stopping them from being able to think. We're changing what we know as real within a space of a few decades, but we're not really treating people with respect. Science needs to grow up, and it needs to be about finding the truth instead of supporting theories. Why do you think scientists want to know why prehistoric animals became extinct? Well, I think the number one reason for that is science should be worth it just for the sake of itself. It should be the absolute search for the truth, and the truth is worth finding. The evidence for why things happen, we're going to learn from it. I could teach you how, looking around my desk, I could teach you how a fork is made, and we would still learn something valuable from the experience of finding out how this is made. How do we form the alloys? How do we press it? How do we come up with the right shape? How was this made? How was it invented? Who came up with the idea for this? Why has it got a crease down the middle? Why do we decorate the fork? All of those different things are going to teach us a lot about how the world works. The formation of alloys, the social evolution that led to the creation of a fork. Decorating it tells us a lot about how humans work as a social animal. We stand to learn a lot from something as mundane as a piece of cheap cutlery. So learning is always worthwhile. It'll always teach you more than just what's in front of you. I read a story once about a Buddhist monk, a trainee monk, sitting beside the river. The monk said to him, sit by the river and stare at the water. And he stared at the water, and every day he went back and said, what have you learned? And he said, nothing, I just stared at the water. Good, sit there for another day. And eventually, according to the story, the monk went back and said, finally, what have you learned? And he said, water represents time and humanity. All humans are connected through time, just as all water is connected. All rivers are one river. All oceans are one ocean. All water is connected, the same as all humans are connected. And he said, well done, you finally learned the lesson. So he learned the lesson about the truth of humanity by staring at water, because all things in the universe are connected. So it's worth learning just for the sake of learning. But I think when we talk about prehistoric animals and why they became extinct, it's very important that we understand what happened in our past so that we don't repeat those mistakes in the future. Did mammoths run out of a food supply in a way that could affect us? Could we bring mammoths back? Were mammoths dangerous in some way to themselves or to the environment? What part did they play in our evolution or our development? So all of those are important questions, and I think it's well worth doing the research into those things. I think scientists probably want to know why prehistoric animals became extinct, because that is also our story. It's our story, our history, and our history is often our future. So I think it's a well worthwhile piece of research to do. So those are the questions I wanted to cover today. I know it's not the most fascinating piece of writing. That's up to you from now on. Now I need suggestions from you of what you'd like to cover. Until we get Google Classroom, we can't do anything else but this. So I want information from you about what you would like to cover, because we're probably going to do at least 2 of these a week. Maybe more until we get Google Classroom running, because I can't give you quizzes or tests or anything. Nothing. So we'll try and come up with some project work, but in the meantime, I want to hear from you what explanations you would like to cover in class. So that's all for today. See you next time.